Today I have the pleasure of introducing Reginaldo Haslett-Marroquin. Rehi is from Guatemala. He's the Chief Strategy Officer of the Main Street Project. We are here today with Rehi to talk about the innovative agricultural system that he's developed that's changing how food is produced around the world. Rehi, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yeah. Will you start by telling us your name, organization, and how you first got involved with regenerative agriculture?
I'm Reginaldo Marroquin originally, then as a married man, Haslett-Marroquin, which is really fun actually. Having gone through that process, cultural adaptation and all of that, as having come from Guatemala and moved into the United States to do this work, I really came into this as a kid. I grew up in the rainforest with my brothers, sisters, and regenerative agriculture was primarily, even though we didn't know it was going to be called eventually regenerative, we knew that when we started our farming systems in the rainforest, and we did what everybody else did, which was you cut the forest, you burn it, and you put corn and soybeans, and black beans and squash and all that. We only did it once that I remember, and then my dad just said quickly, if we are not going to make it, this is going to, didn't say it in those words, but this is going to degenerate the ability of this soil to feed us. And so we started creating a whole new system in the middle of all of these people doing the opposite. And that's how I as a kid became very interested on the biodynamics of these new ways of producing food, and later on professionally learn about how much more efficient that system is and so on from an energy transformation standpoint and so on. But that's really where my beginnings were. Now, the current system that I'm working on came as a result of trying to adapt to the current challenges that we are facing with climate change, with poverty, especially this almost unbelievable point that we have gotten to with food insecurity. Yet almost every community in the world has the capacity to be food secure. And why have we not done like what we did as when growing up? We were poor, yes. We were never food insecure. And now we got these massive institutions talking about food insecurity as the purpose for being, while really food insecurity continuing to increase. That's really what got me into thinking, okay, would there be not a silver bullet, but a much more strategic and simpler way of thinking about it? And so poultry is an entry point that deals with those things head on. It allows us to do larger scale deployment of small farm systems and do them in those principles that I learned. So that's really my background, my entry into this way of thinking, and now professionally as a systems engineer and so on.
Nice. So why poultry? Was this something that was integrated in your family's agricultural system in Guatemala, or?
Yes, and if you look at the whole world, there is hardly a place on earth that doesn't have some, farmer on earth that doesn't have some sort of a, familiarity with some kind of bird, whether it's pheasants in some parts and turkey in other parts and chickens in other parts and so on and so forth. But, even pigeons in Vietnam, for example, as a source of food. But birds are the one livestock that joins us globally. So if we're going to create a global movement that actually addresses some of these fundamental issues, and we are going to do that from the standpoint of regenerative agriculture, meaning socially, economically, and ecologically regenerative, highly scientifically and all that, we have to start with one thing that is common to most of the world. And that's what chickens do. I mean, we could be thinking about other birds as well, but meat, chicken, and eggs are the two things that we can do in most of the world today. And they also immediately address the issues of food insecurity and all of that, but also as part of a fully integrated system. The chicken is economically the most accessible, the fastest turnaround period. It's actually easier to start small and expand to almost any scale you want without compromising the fundamental principles of regeneration. It also is more familiar with most farmers in the world. If we're going to build a global movement behind this allows us to access, the millions, over 500,000, a billion farmers that the FAO credit with producing over 70% of our food. If we're going to engage them, well, this is one way we can actually engage all of them. We can't do that on the basis of vegetable production or cattle production or pig production or any of those other livestock and so on. And if we're going to do this from a regenerative standpoint ecologically, the ecological regeneration really starts in the biology of the soil and all of that, in the diversity of that biology. And that biology without animals, it really degenerates to a point that is no longer um, sustainable for the long term.
Okay, so you guys are creating a scalable, replicable model. Can you tell us a little bit more about the system to give people just a brief overview of it?
Yes, so to build large-scale systems under regenerative principles, and by that we mean, that don't destroy the ecology, regenerate the soil, regenerate the ability of people to connect with each other, regenerate the economic transactional activity so that there is no extractiveness in the process and so on. So triple bottom line, in other words. In order to develop a system that can be scaled up, you have to develop production units, as in any kind of engineering process, where the production units is reflective rather than a list, a recipe-like list of things that you need to do, rather than being a blueprint of an actual process by which you analyze the resources you have in place and then assemble them to produce that unit of production that the best reflects the geoevolutionary blueprint of the animal itself. And in the case of chickens, just to clarify, they are not ruminants, so they are not pasture animals. They will eat pasture, but it isn't. You can't really build a system on the idea that chickens can be pasture-based. You have to build it on the original blueprint, which means jungles. Chickens are evolved over jungles. And so as we think of that unit, for example, in San Miguel de Allende in Guanajuato, where we have put together this one unit for this high desert ecology, we adopted the Minnesota-based unit of production to reflect the regenerative capacity of that area to the extent that we were able to understand. And then we put in the perennial crops that are native to that region, and we are populating the unit with that blueprint of that area, including the heritage breeds eventually, and so on and so forth. Now, what it means is we end up with a blueprint of a process by how we build that production unit. But once you got to that point, in any given ecology in the world, then as long as you reproduce it within that ecology, you can then replicate it. That's the kind of engineering discipline that hasn't been put to work in a lot of our non-conventional systems. And this is why we saw this huge opportunity to get into this business.
Yeah, so you're adapting to local context. And so what does this system, how exactly does this system regenerate local economies and societies? What effect does it have on the supply chain?
Well, let's put it this way. We are not necessarily reacting to the conventional system, because that's really not the purpose of this. The purpose of this is to produce a new system, a new blueprint from which we can re-engineer the way we grow and distribute foods, and the way we resupply those value chains and those supply chains, so that we can transform the kind of food consumers can have access to, and we can also transform the way farmers are interacting with each other. So if you think of this, conventional systems are designed, are engineered to be extractive of the labor of people, extractive of the natural resources, chemical resources of the soil, extractive of fossil resources to be able to make it, in their words, more efficient in terms of productivity and so on. Although at the end of the day, if we look at the real measure of efficiency in terms of agriculture is energy transformation, then we really don't achieve any efficiency by streamlining and under the equation of the conventional system. So as we think of how does this work in that context, the economic regeneration of a system like this depends on the multiplicity and the ripple effect of all of the economic transactions, so that extraction doesn't really happen. Rather than extraction, there is a flow, and there is a balance of those resources. And so somebody is not getting overexploited because they are doing one or another piece of the system, of participating in one or another piece of the system, like it happens today in the linear way we have organized the extractive nature of the conventional thinking. So that's where this regenerates the ability of people to bring back the resources and keep them running in the communities all the way from consumers to the producers. And this is why it's important to create that cycle all the way through. And that's the only way it can be economically regenerative. Ecologically, it's actually a matter of design, because if we're going to design efficient systems, we have to work with the ecology. And by restoring and regenerating the ecology, in fact, is how we achieve the economic returns that we seek. And by organizing those economic returns so that they flow in a balanced way, we keep them from getting extracted from the families that need them to sustain and regenerate and continue to regenerate the system over time. But as you do those two things, the economic and the ecological, and achieve higher levels of energy transformation efficiency, you also are creating, by its own nature, the social interactions, which allows us to regenerate the ability of people to be more with each other, so that we learn more about how to live together. Because that is what is degenerating, our ability to understand who we are in the larger context of the world and food. So
essentially, we're living in a world that's increasingly degenerative because of the industrial agriculture system and the health crises that we're facing. So why does the world need this model in particular?
So as you think of what conventional agriculture has delivered us, we see a lot of health problems on the consumer side. So as a consumer, I don't want to continue to purchase these cheap foods that are making all of us sick. I mean, the levels of obesity and diabetes and all of that, food-related diseases, is so huge, and there's no need for it. Because we can develop a new system. So we always start with the question, what if? And in this case, what if we don't even need cheap food? What if the actual idea of cheap food is so misunderstood that it's actually more expensive at the end of the day because of all of the consequences of consuming that? And what if what we really need is a reconnection between the consumers and the farmers, so that we can re-engineer how food actually happens from the farm to the table, and how that energy gets reintegrated back into the system? Because these are cycles. Regenerative agriculture works on the basis of circular thinking. And so we need this kind of systems, because not only consumers need and want and are willing now to pay the actual cost of healthy foods, and understanding that it isn't actually more expensive. When you add up all of the cost of cheap food, really good quality, nutritious, natural foods are actually not more expensive. It just looks like it when you pay at the grocery store, at the market. So once we understand that, and we understand that we can change the space in between, then we can go back to the other side. On the farmer side, just like consumers, farmers are suffering from lack of opportunity, ownership and control, access to resources, new technologies, and all of that, because all of that is concentrated, all of the ownership of and control of the current foods is concentrated on this other side of the equation. So both the consumers need these systems, because we need healthy foods out there accessible to everyone, and farmers, small farmers especially, and if we want to quote data from the global community, it is well established that over 70% of the food in the world is produced by small farmers with under 5 hectares of land. This allows us to bring them back into the equation at a larger scale, with more power, ownership, and control, and connect them back to consumers, and then, of course, build the industry of the middle, which, by the way, could be the conventional industry itself. It's just brought over for a different purpose. Probably not under the same ownership, because the fact that it doesn't change right now is because the current ownership is not interested in being part of a new system. But if they were to change their minds, that infrastructure doesn't have to look different. We don't have to reinvent the wheel in that case. Processing foods is just processing foods. You got to change how workers are treated, and the issues of contamination and stuff like that to make it regenerative. But this is why we need this. We need better economic opportunities, an economy that works for everybody in this case in the food systems. We need to restore the ecology all the way from the production to the consumer, so that the ecology as a definer of the healthiness of this food and the wholesomeness is regenerated to deliver exactly that. And we need to regenerate the social connectedness within consumers and producers, so that we can rebuild that trust and confidence that was lost as we gave up the ownership and control and ended up with what we have today. So that's why we need this new system.
So just to segue a little bit to why we're here in Mexico City, so we've been here together with Regeneration International, for an event called 4 per 1,000 Food Soils for Food Security and Climate. So it's the French initiative that was launched in December in Paris. Rehi, how does the Regenerative Poultry Project synchronize with the intentions of the 4 per 1,000 initiative, and what opportunities does the initiative bring for Main Street Project and for Mexico and more broadly Latin America?
Well, that's a whole load of
It's a big question.
of good analysis to do that we can carry out on this. So here's how we connect this kind of opportunity up and down. 4 for 1,000 is an ecological imperative. The idea of bringing back 4 for every 1,000 particles of CO2 in the air back into permanent storage, and doing that on the basis of soil restoration, is critical. But really, that shouldn't be the end goal. The end goal should be beyond that. When you think of just bringing that carbon back, think about why it was out there in the first place. Because there was irresponsible management of our soils. And if we just bring it back because we built an economic opportunity for corporations to make more money out of bringing the carbon back into the soil, we lost again. Because the minute we stop paying them and the minute they stop putting their hands out so that the global community continues to pay them to come up with solutions to the problems that they created themselves, we're back in square one again. So what our system does is bring the ownership and control of the 4 for 1,000 initiative to communities. That's how we're going to win in the long term. That's what's going to make it permanent and regenerative and sustainable and all of those things that we keep saying we want out of this initiative. And so for us, bringing in another initiative, we could make it 1 in 1,000, 10 in 1,000, whatever it is that we come up with in Mexico. The idea would be to deliver the 4 for 1,000 goals on the basis of the social restoration of that connectivity that we have been talking about so far of consumers and producers. And so for every 1,000 farmers that we have in Mexico, out of the 26.9 farmers, I can't remember the exact factor, but out of the millions of farmers that we have that in Mexico that own less than 5 hectares, if we took 5 for every 1,000, for example, we could deploy enough production to supply 100% of the eggs that Mexico consumes right now. Total around 15,700 production units, mimicking the one that we have in San Miguel de Allende. Now, that allows us not only to restore that soil, to deliver on the 4 for 1,000, but also allows us to do it on the basis of people engagement, community engagement, rather than making it another business opportunity for the carbon traders and for all of that system that is already causing the problem themselves to just make more profits out of this idea. This is where we bring it to earth, so to speak, back to the soil.
So you're really just putting the power back in the hands of the small farmers.
Well, that would be the idea. I mean, if we don't do that, we are really not going to change the way things are.
Yeah.
Because what created the problem in the first place is greed, is lack of interest and respect for nature and all of that. And the folks who did that, the corporations that are responsible for that, it's not in their DNA to do otherwise. And to think that somehow they are going to solve this problem is really naive. We have to do it on the basis of redistribution of the ownership and control of the end result. And I believe in this case what we have done, as well as creating a very nice enterprise opportunity and design for small farmers to get into this business, because we did that in alignment with this set of regenerative principles. By default, we meet all of the standards that the 4 for 1,000 initiative placed on top of this idea in this framework to begin with. So I'm happy that Mexico signed this agreement, because that gives us a moral imperative. And it gives it an argument to be made for the fact that now Mexico has to deliver. It's not legally bound, because obviously these are voluntary commitments, but it does create the environment under which we can start this conversation about how do we change for real some of these really large issues on the economic, ecological, and social disintegration that we have, so far achieved as a result of how the ownership and control of these resources have been structured. So,
Nice. All right. Well, thanks for joining us today, Rehi. We really appreciate you taking the time.
my pleasure. Thank you. It's been great.